Hello and welcome to Unwatchables. I am Marc Dottavio.
And I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we are joined by Erik Davis, the managing editor of Fandango, for what might be the most heart-wrenching film we have ever covered. Erik was at the Slam Dance premiere and wrote the first review of this true crime documentary, which led to a change in Canadian law. So we will talk about what makes this particular nonfiction film so uniquely devastating and how it holds up after all these years. The film is 2008's Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. So, Erik, like we said in the beginning, everybody, Erik Davis is the managing editor of Fandango. He's also contributed reviews to countless different publications you can see collected on his Rotten Tomatoes page. Did I get all that right, Erik?
Yeah, I don't know if I still have a Rotten Tomatoes page, though. I might. I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah.
I'm pretty sure I saw you pop up on there.
But yes, over the years, I have crossed Rotten Tomatoes many times.
Okay. And I know we were just talking about you were just coming off a week in Las Vegas for CinemaCon. And I've been following your tweets from that. So I guess, could you tell us a little bit about that, or what maybe some of the more memorable moments were for you before we get into the heavy stuff here?
Yeah, sure. So CinemaCon, for those who don't know, is a convention for the theatrical industry. So all of the exhibitors, all of the theaters from really around the world descend upon Las Vegas for a week. I go primarily because all of the major studios do presentations. They'll have these, 2.5 hour long presentations where they'll give you a preview of their slate, not just for the rest of the year, but going into the next 2 years. And so for me, it's super helpful because I can kind of get ahead of a lot of these films and have some extra context and know what's coming down the pike. I think from a coverage or an editorial standpoint, there's a lot of interest because we see a lot of first trailers and first looks and news drops out of there. And so it's become sort of almost like a mini Comic-Con in terms of just news. Mm-hmm. There isn't a lot of stuff that's released out of CinemaCon. A lot of that stuff is for the room only. But studios do take advantage and use it as a marketing opportunity to kind of release some other stuff. But, that's like one aspect of it. But then if there's like a new candy or a new recliner that a company's making, like they'll have a whole trade floor of all of that stuff, and then there's all kinds of meetings that happen and deals that are made there too. So it's actually a pretty cool industry convention. I enjoy it more than Comic-Con personally, but being in Vegas for 4 days kind of drains your soul a little bit, but it was a good time.
Okay, was there anything in particular that surprised you, or that you left thinking oh, that actually looks pretty cool, that we haven't gotten a chance to see it?
Yeah, I think they showed some stuff for Gladiator 2, Ridley Scott's sequel, that was probably the first kind of extended trailer for that, and that looked bonkers. That looked wild. This one has Pedro Pascal and Denzel Washington and Paul Mescal, and so the three of them just look awesome in it. And it's Ridley, and I always say Ridley somehow is banging out one film a year. He's almost 100 years old, but he's still doing it. God bless him, and I will always go see a Ridley Scott movie, even if some of them are I don't know, Ridley, like Napoleon. I don't know if this one, if you got this one, but it's still ridiculously entertaining to watch.
All right, well, Gladiator 2, that is...
I had no idea. That sounds like a joke. Whoa.
No, coming this November. I think, and maybe it's a big awards movie. Could be a Best Picture contender. We'll see.
Awesome.
I'm ready. I'm entertained.
Cool. Well, if that wasn't draining enough for you, this particular film could definitely change the mood. I definitely wasn't kidding in the intro when I talk about it being... one of the most gut-wrenching things that we've covered, at least as far as I'm concerned. And it's not really in terms of graphic content or anything like a lot of other things that we would cover on Unwatchables. So I do want to kind of go back in time first to 2008 when this came out. And I will stop at some point here to give anyone an idea who hasn't seen it, what it's about. But I think it falls pretty snugly into the true crime documentary lexicon, and I feel like maybe back in 2008, maybe you can shed some light on this, Erik, that this wasn't something you necessarily saw like as commonly as you do now. Like there's a lot of YouTube channels devoted to true crime things that are kind of put together and edited like this.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're just looking at, A&E or any of those channels that will have things like this. So do you feel like this felt a little different or fresher at the time maybe than it does now?
Yeah, without a doubt, and like that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this one too, because I imagine, on a podcast about films that are hard to watch, you guys talk about horror movies, and so I think this is a different kind of horror story. But yeah, I mean, back then in 2008, there wasn't this wave or this sort of obsession with true crime like there is now. This isn't Netflix was not where Netflix is now. They weren't churning out one of
Yeah, once
these
a month. Yeah.
yeah per week. So it was definitely a very different kind of true crime, documentary. But I think also it was just very powerful too. I think we watch a lot of true crime, and there's sort of this detachment because it's like somebody who was like really following the crime or following the situation and decided to make a podcast about it or a documentary about it. This one was made by a guy named Kurt Kenny, who was the best friend of the victim in this story. And they had grown up together, they had made movies together. They were like those that this was the generation, sort of my generation was that first generation that had like home movie cameras, and we're like, wow, like we could just like record all day with these things. And like kids just went out into their neighborhoods and made movies, going in, late 80s 90s, when these guys were growing up. And so I think that level of intimacy and it being his best friend that he's making a movie about, I think, is what separated it, and what still separates it from a lot of true crime that we see now.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's a
totally
great point.
personal, and that's what makes it
Mhm.
so visceral and like almost feel like something you're not allowed to be privy to. That's like you get that feeling through it. It's like you're witnessing someone like actually processing. This isn't like, oh, I'm a filmmaker and I'm interested in true crime, so I found this story and it's a real juicy one. It's like he is living and dying by this, and the people that you're seeing on screen are living and dying by it too. It's like they're all involved in that process and processing. It's insane.
Yeah,
Without a
and
doubt.
it's interesting that that Kurt Kenny, he doesn't really have any other major credits to his name. I tried kind of looking through to see what he's been up to, and
Yeah, no.
he had done some short films before, and I think some features that don't seem to be very widely seen. I was only able to see one feature, not actually see, but just hear about one that he did, a fiction film after this. Uh, and to me, that only adds to the sense that this guy might not have been like necessarily a significant filmmaker or ever gotten on the map if it wasn't for this unique set of circumstances. And that's where that personal thing comes in.
Or maybe
This is an
didn't even
era.
have all that much of like a mission to do so. It sounds like he does have like he wants to create films and
Mm,
stuff. He was an artist, but it makes it even more like this is not about trying to start a artistic career. This is like, yeah, it's from his heart and it needs to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and he did go on. I know he directed episodes for various TV shows. I believe
mm,
that. So he had, he did. I know, having spoken to Kurt throughout, especially when this film premiered, and you see it in the film too. I mean, he was a kid that was obsessed with making movies, and so I think he definitely wanted to become a filmmaker. And Andrew Bagby was in a lot of his movies, the victim in the film.
mm.
But yeah, I think he's kind of found his way through the industry as people do. It's not, even though this film I think made some noise, and it helped other opportunities arise for him. You still got to kind of make it happen in Hollywood, which is not very easy.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this this director was basically like, okay, I guess what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the best documentaries will start out in a way that they never could have anticipated happening. So, there's some documentaries that are really brilliant and deconstructive and have kind of this plan, but then there's also ones that start out following one thing and they had no idea what was going to happen as they went along. And I think that's partly of what happened here. And the reason that people, I think, are so impacted by this particular movie is because it really is built on this shock surprise element that happens, which we'll talk specifically about since we will get into spoilers and everything. But for anyone who hasn't seen the film, it's kind of structured on this series of rug pulls. Like the first part is positioned very clearly as this remembrance, like this tribute to his friend, that he's taking a road trip to talk to people that he knew, and that he's going to be making a video for his deceased friend's son, who's going to grow up not knowing him. Then we get a turn to where it's revealed that he was murdered, and we start to learn about the crime, the perpetrator of the crime, who turns out to be his kind of a jilted lover. And then at that point, we get another twist where it turns out that she's pregnant with his child. This is after his murder. And that goes into this custody battle between her and the grandparents, and them having to be cordial with her and share the baby back and forth, which is pretty tough stuff to, like, it's a nightmare ordeal.
So rough.
It's very painful. And then that's followed by an even bigger reveal, which maybe I'll hold off on that for a little bit.
We'll be merciful in some way.
Because I first saw this back in like 2009, and this is my first time revisiting it also, and I was terrified to watch this again. Like, I'll never forget my first time watching this and kind of walking around in a daze afterwards, almost feeling like real grief. And I think it's a very different experience going back, knowing what's going on the whole time. But if you, Erik, could tell us a little bit about what that screening was like. I mean, was there a mood in the particular room as this was unfolding?
Yeah. So it's interesting because this premiered at the Slam Dance Film Festival, and the Slam Dance Film Festival is like, parallel to the Sundance Film Festival. And so, most of the people that are there in Park City are there for Sundance. And then, if you can kind of sneak away and get an afternoon at Slam Dance, you'll see some of the, some interesting stuff. And so that's what I did. I had a buddy who was like, "Hey, you got to go watch this documentary. Like, it's at Slam Dance, but it's like the craziest story." And he's like, "I'm not going to tell you what happens." And so I'm like, "Really?" Like, so that right away is like the craziest story. I'm not going to tell you what happens. I got to go. So I got a ticket and I went to the premiere. And Slam Dance is not as, I wouldn't say maybe sophisticated as Sundance. It's kind of like this little tiny indie festival amidst this other giant, festival. And, there's folding chairs and you kind of pile into this small little tiny room. And this was the premiere of the film. And I had no idea what it was about. It was just like, it's a crazy story. You got to go. And so when it started playing, I didn't realize, like, Andrew's entire family was there, and so this was like a lot of people that knew him, a lot of people that knew this story were all in that room. I went in having no idea what this thing was even about. And so as it started to play out, I mean, it was a theatrical experience I will never forget, because the film is so powerful to watch. I'm emotional as it is. I cry watching like sports games, and so I'm just a mess. So there's so many layers to this film, some of which you just went through, and I think that each layer has this power to it, and it unravels in a different way. And I think for Kurt, who's making this film, the film changes like 3 or 4 different times in terms of who he's making it for. And I think it's only at the end that he realizes, really who this film is for. And I think for like the audience is going through this journey, Kurt is going through this journey, his friends and family, Andrews, are going through this journey, and it's so powerful. And yeah, I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and Andrew's parents were at the screening and they spoke afterwards, and they were very, very emotional about it too. And so, it's the kind of situation where, his parents are, very emotional, very angry, and you would be too. And like you said, his parents had to, like, there was a period in this film where she gets out on bail That's part of what the fight for change the law was, and they have to share custody. Like they have to go to visitation with the woman that murdered their son. Like it's the most craziest, most bonkers situation you could ever think to put somebody in, and that's only like one layer of of the story. So it was powerful, yes, to say the least.
And I know, so Seth, you're the only one of us who just saw this for the first time, like right now.
Oh
So
wow.
I am a little curious about your experience since we're coming at this as something that we first saw a long time ago and are kind of grappling with again. Uh, but
I want.
you just
Oh,
got conked over the head with it.
I did. I just want to say I was first. I was at. I was on a date at a petting zoo, petting like a kangaroo with my partner, and it was just like I gotta go home though. At the end of this, I gotta watch this movie for the podcast. Then I watched this movie like right after, like an hour after I'm like having this beautiful time petting this kangaroo. You know, uh, boy, devastating. And I mean, the biggest thing that you take away from it is like it is made by someone who is so close to it, and therefore is like almost it feels like during the editing and putting it together is having like breakdowns like with the editing choices that are just so like no one who was actually if you were actually removed from it you would feel like strange or guilty about putting such an emotional touch and sometimes like I don't know sometimes like deliberately shocking deliberately upsetting like trying to get like he wants like the audience to be there and feel even though we can't like we feel awful and disgusted but we can't even fathom the pain that a friend let alone the parents of this murdered son are feeling and everything but it's like an attempt with these jarring like editing choices and like the screen goes red sometimes like people are just posed as villains there's no like it's even like I don't know it some of it almost reminded me of like I don't know, like noise music or like more transgressive art and things like that. There's like they're deliberately using elements to like upset an audience and get the audience in like a shocked place. Which again, with like true events, so often it's like trying to do justice and trying to just be naturalistic. Here though, that is what was just so painful about it and what makes it kind of a documentary like no other, at least as far as I've seen. Only like a few others could I see being so personal like that, and that is just what keeps coming back.
It really does feel to me like what you're saying, Seth, is that this is a really insistent movie about playing the, emotions of the audience. That it's using all these different techniques, which I know this time kind of felt almost like a kitchen sink approach to me, where there's a lot of really rapid fire cutting, a lot of interview subjects who only get like one sentence or sometimes less out before
Mm-hmm.
it goes to something else. There was even a point early on where I almost checked it to make sure it wasn't on like 1.5 speed because even the voiceovers seemed to be going really fast. And you're right, we get like heartbeats on the soundtrack at numerous points and freeze frames and dramatic cuts to black and stuff. Um, I don't know, does any of that stuff feel like a little bit? Um, I don't know. Maybe it's because we're so used to seeing it now in other true crime documentaries. But is there something maybe a little corny about that sometimes? Like it's trying too hard, or do you think that it's just about getting you caught up in the rush?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my point of view, I also think about Kurt. You know, Kurt, he wrote, he directed, he edited, he scored. Like he did everything on this thing. And I'm trying to think too, like as he's going through making this film, how many times the film itself changed on him. You know, like even early on, he's like, he grew up making movies with Andrew, and so he wanted to make one last movie with him, right? And it starts off of like you said, he's honoring his friend. He's going around to everybody that's ever knew him, and I think he's kind of, I think he's trying to catch the pace of what it was like to be friends with him. We're going to do this, and now we're going to go here, and now you're going to make this, and there. I think there was just kind of like a breathless sort of, Andrew along for the ride that Kurt was on, where he was just kind of always going, and I think so. There's that kind of pace to it early on, but then as once we kind of get into his death and the woman responsible for it and trying to catch her, I think it kind of starts changing on him. And then once they find out that she was pregnant, and now it becomes a film for about for the son about the father, then it becomes sort of a social justice kind of film. To stop her. So I think because the film becomes something else so often within it, I think tonally and the pace sort of jumps all over the place. And yeah, was he intentional about making you feel something? Without a doubt. I mean, this is a story that makes you feel something. I mean, everybody he talked to was still so close to this event. These events, you could tell it. The parents were are super impactful watching this, and I think ultimately the film becomes for them, and to help them. But yeah, I mean, is some of it a little bit over the top? Sure, because I think, especially towards the latter part of the film where it becomes about changing the law in Canada. I think sometimes you got to hit people over the head, and you got to make them, push. You have to make them push past what they would normally feel watching a documentary or watching a film, where it's like, oh, that was sad. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to go make myself a bagel now, and that it's gone. I think that he wanted it to last with people. He wanted it to stick with people. He wanted Andrew to stick with people. He wanted his, the death, his son, and then ultimately how wrong they were by Canadian officials. He wanted that to stick with people too, because ultimately they wanted to get the laws changed in Canada. So I think when it comes to that being the ultimate sort of what they wanted out of this, I don't fault him for going a bit over the top in terms of making sure the film had a lasting impression on people.
Like I like what you're saying, and one of the like worrisome things about like if you were to approach a project like this, or like some of the true crime documentaries I see, is the concern of, yeah, you made it like super entertaining, and like I even find myself like getting sucked up in some of those, and then I have to like walk myself back and be like, well, there's like an element of like that's kind of sleazy, that you're making this tragedy into a ripping yarn that I just can't wait to watch the next episode of this thing. But here that goes out the window for me. I like, this is like one of the instances where that is permitted, because I think partly like what you were saying, there is some like callback to the fact that even all of this aside, there is a callback to this is his filmmaking buddy, and there's something about like making a movie here, and this is a movie for him in some ways. So the making of it being something, you don't want to say, I don't want to say entertaining, it's far from like that's like a hard word to use, but it is like you are glued. It's like it's put together in a way like he wants people to stick with it and be moved and be like go through the narrative twist and turn and everything, which I think is what's going to get it out there and get it to be as effective as it can for people, almost like to the point of it being almost absurd in how like, I don't know, if like pop editing and like getting me like just so invested in like a like almost like in a filmic sort of sense. But I don't know, and for me it never, even in its really like wild moments, it never loses that feeling of like, whoa, I'm in the room with like this person who's grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously he had such access to home videos not just personally of them growing up together, but also of videos they were able to find of his friend with his eventual killer. Videos of Zachary growing up. So he definitely has like all full access here, and it does feel like this is something that's trying to be bigger than just a movie. In the end, it does turn into kind of an advocacy for changing laws, and
Mm-hmm.
he has a specific goal to accomplish here that goes beyond maybe tasteful, filmmaking. But Erik, when you wrote your initial review of this, I know that was probably the first one published coming out of that. Is that true?
Yeah, it was. I was working for a site called Cinematical at the time. I was the
Mhm.
editor of the site, and Cinematical was one of the earlier film blogs, I guess you could say, prior to the social media blowing up and the digital revolution. There was an era of websites about film. In it, Cool News, Joe Blow, Dark Horizons, Slash Film, Film School Rejects.
Mhm.
These sites all sort of came up together um, in that sort of renegade film blog. Like, you know, this it was in a very interesting era for movie writing because there was this very print versus digital kind of battle that was happening.
Mhm.
It was happening, and a lot of it was happening at film festivals because you had these sort of groups of young bloggers who weren't working for your varieties and your Hollywood reporters, and they were, jumping onto the scene and churning out reviews for these films and making a lot of noise on as social media was sort of lifting up, and it was, I think, pissing off a lot of print
Mhm.
publications, and print would kind of write about them like they're renegades and they don't matter. And so it was really exciting to be part of that at that time, and I was very proud to work for Cinematical. Karina Longworth, who has her own tremendous podcast, started it. She was one of the co-founders, and so I cut my teeth sort of working for her and learning from her. But yeah, it was when I was like I said, Slam Dance kind of happens Sunday. Like all of the film community is paying most attention to Sundance, and so when you slide into
Mhm.
Slam Dance and you watch a movie at its premiere that nobody else knows about, I only heard about it because my buddy knew Kurt, and he was like, "I know the story. You got to be there." I was the only kind of journalist at the time that was in that room watching it, and so I filed my review immediately after because it was just so powerful. And I remember, kind of really going off on how it was one of the most powerful films I've ever watched. And I know, in the weeks and months and years that have followed, I had seen Kurt, and he had told me that that review, because Cinematical was a site at the time that a lot of people were paying attention to, and that, especially when you're at a film festival and you're looking for that kind of review, that one person to say this movie changed my life. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, boom, you have a bunch of critics going to see. I have to go see this film now. And so I think that review, if anything, it helped inspire a lot of other people to go see it, and it kind of made a little bit of noise about it, at a time, at a time when kind of needed a little bit of noise made about it. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I think it kind of helped. It helped push it without a doubt, out there a bit more.
Yeah, I remember that era being like when a blog like that could write something, about a little known film like this, and it would make a real difference. Whether or not, it was movies or, it could be like a Pitchfork review back in the day that would totally like blow up a band's career. And
Yeah,
it does feel like that's kind of been lost now. It's
it has.
especially now that it's almost like the institutions that ran the print publications are having their revenge, buying out and destroying all of these sites now, because they lost control for a little bit and now they're starting to like reel it back in.
Yes, but I also think it's one of the most interesting times to be a film critic. I mean, like, look at you guys. You guys have this podcast, and I think there's all this new media now, and it's not just finding a website to pay you or to bring you on staff or writing a review. I think there's so many other ways to talk about film now, whether you're talking about them on YouTube or TikTok or a podcast. So I think yes, I think it's hard out there to be a print critic in this day and age. A lot of websites are having some problem. Advertising is not in the best spot, but I do think that if you love film and you love talking about film, I think there are a lot of outlets and there are a lot of other options that you can kind of say what you want to say in different ways. So I would say that.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of knowing, where to look and where to find your people now. So I totally agree with that. That it seems like there's just too much out there now, but it's still just as much good stuff as ever. And,
Without a
That's
doubt,
always
yeah.
the thing. Yeah,
mhm,
that's always the misconception that my dad will always go off about. It's like
right.
not true. It's just a different world.
Yeah. Well,
But anyway,
I think it's time to directly address though the big twist that happens like in the third act of this movie, because I think that especially if you haven't seen this before and you're listening to our conversation, you could be like, okay, well, this does sound like an emotional, interesting documentary, but the actual experience of sitting through the movie, which is for most of its runtime, it's positioned as this direct address to Zachary, his friend's son, that this is how you're going to get to know your dad, and these are your grandparents. You're going to get to are going to be wonderful people who are growing up raising you. And again, if anyone doesn't want anything spoiled, this is the time to head out
now
and
go walk away, watch it.
go have a devastating movie
Okay,
experience, and then come back here.
now you're
And
back. Wow, wasn't ouch. Now you're
yeah,
back. Okay. Yeah, well, I was almost curious because and I didn't think to look at that until now. I wondered if it was not edited in a traditional way. I don't know. Maybe it's silly for me to think this, but maybe it was edited literally in a way like he's editing it for a while and then something happens, and I was curious if he was editing it over a period of years and kind of keeping that intact rather than the like now that everything is finished and done, going back and editing everything together like a traditional true story documentary. I was kind of curious about that, and I don't know if there's information about that or not.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever talked to Kurt about that, and I'd be curious. I think there's probably some element of it that happened while he was making it. Um, I think he started making it after Andrew had died, so that without a doubt he was making it after that. But
Hmm.
was he making it when they found out that she was pregnant, or when the next big thing happened? So like it is a good point. How far along in the story was he before he decided to go all the way back and start making it? But I mean, I do know that when this film first premiered, they were still fighting to change the law. Like there was still a lot
Hmm.
happening um, with regards to their fight to change the law. So there was an aspect of the story that wasn't even finished yet when the film premiered as well. And I
I
know Kurt's
think
gone back and added stuff.
I think at the very least, there's some interviews that you can tell are shot while Zachary is still alive, because
Hmm.
he asks them to give to what would you say to him, and the way that they answer the question is very much as if they're actually he's actually going to see this one day.
Yeah.
And what happens presumably at some point while he was working on this project was that the mother disappeared with Zachary, and they were both found dead. So obviously that's incredibly shocking and upsetting, especially the first time that you're watching this, because you've been very deliberately told basically in every little way that he's still alive. So
Yeah, you think there's no way there can be another rug pull, but there,
exactly.
because the whole movie hinges, like it feels at a certain point, the whole movie hinges on this fact that Zachary, the baby, is still alive.
Yeah, and this it's almost like we're seeing it happen in real time, even though if you go back through the whole movie, it does seem like a lot of it had to have been made with that knowledge. And also, that's why I was so curious about going back and watching this is, okay, now if I go in knowing this the whole time, like, how is this going to play? And I personally had a very different reaction because it was, besides the fact that it was significantly more excruciating,
Yeah.
Obviously knowing all this while I'm seeing it. I don't know, it made me think a lot of things about like the decisions, that you make when you're making a movie, because, I don't doubt this director's intent at all, that there's no way that he meant for this to feel exploitative. But sometimes I think you can inadvertently make something still kind of play like that. And I think it's really risky territory with treating this so aggressively like a twist. Like, obviously movies are supposed to manipulate your emotions. That's like what they're there for. They're probably the best like art form at doing that. And, obviously true crime documentaries, I know how those work. Like, I don't expect you to tell me up front how everyone is going to, end up in the end. It's more the extent of the misdirection, the way the whole movie is. So like he's saying, he's always addressing you as Zachary. All the interviews, even ones that are clearly filmed after his death, like, are very carefully edited to remove any clues from them. So, treating it like a big twist and almost feels like the only purpose that it's serving is to goose the audience. And I think that sits a little uncomfortably with me when it's also positioned as this very personal, emotional um, tribute, not just to his friend and to Zachary, but to the grandparents. And I'm like, does this sensationalized almost aspect of it, uh, it made me uncomfortable when it's otherwise trying to do that. So it's more like just the lengths it's going
Yeah.
to do
I
that.
I could see that. I mean, I also, but I think that he does it deliberately, and like I said before, because he wants it to mean something. He wants it to hit
Mm-hmm.
you over the head. Um, but it's and you look at it when it's somebody who's so close to the story, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I put myself in his position. Here's this guy who's been making movies his whole life, and he's always wanted to make a movie. He's been making movies with Andrew, and then he dies in this horrific way, and he decides to make a movie, probably the most important movie he's ever made in his life about Andrew and about this story. But at the same time, he's a guy that loves movies. He's obsessed with movies. He knows how to make movies, and he wants people to sort of feel, I think, the heartache of this and the effect that it had on so many people. And at the same time, he wants to help the Bagbies change laws in Canada. So I don't know, like when you're really trying to enact change in real life. In this case, laws of bail reform in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
because this woman, and a lot of people are probably like, I don't understand. This woman kills him, and then how does she have access to that kid? But they did. They locked her up in Canada, and his parents, Andrew's parents, took full custody, because now she's behind bars.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they had enough proof. Everybody knew that she killed him, but her therapist, showed her and taught her how to get out on bail. And so they actually let her out on bail. When they let her out on bail, they gave custody back to her, which is kind of bonkers.
Crazy.
And that's when this happened. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. To go all the way back to your question, I I think when you want to change laws in a country, you got to kind of go there, I think. And yeah, it may feel a little exploitive at times, and it may feel a little over the top, and you may kind of look at him and say, hey man, like, this is your best buddy, and you're kind of making this film, and you layering it in a way to make it super super entertaining and kind of wild for an audience. But that was the line he had to straddle, right? He had to sort of be the best friend. He had to be he had to not only be the best friend, but he had to be this vocal mouthpiece for this family that was trying to change law, and he had to be a filmmaker that was making an entertaining film that had a bunch of surprises along the way, that was going to get accepted to a film festival, that was going to be written about. So I mean, you have to think about the job that he had to do and balance all of that. And I think, does he do it? Yeah. I mean, I think you're not the first person that has watched this and thought about those things, but I think to a certain degree, I think he had to be a bit over the top in order to achieve everything he wanted to achieve.
Right. It almost feels like he's being a political guy. It's why like political figures feel uncanny to us, even if they are the ones that, even the one you support more often than not, winds up feeling a little like a robotic in some sort of way, or they're shaking hands and they got because that is how, unfortunately, like the systems of power work sometimes, and how sometimes people have to, they might be screaming inside, or like they don't actually want to do it that way, but they know they got to do it a certain way in order to, or it doesn't happen, or X, Y, and Z doesn't happen at all, and I hear that in this, and I see that in this. Yeah, I again pretty much go back to like any of the sort of sparkle and flash is all. It's stuff I feel like he's exempt from in my book. Like someone like this is exempt from, like, I don't know, this like public breakdown that's going on here, and this cry for change here. It's gonna be like this. It's gonna sound a little messy. It's gonna be like kind of desperate, like, if you want, like, but not. I don't see it as desperate in like an embarrassing sort of way, or a pandering sort of way. Really, even it's just by any means necessary, right?
Yeah, it is a blunt instrument, to that extent, which is a
I mean, to
legitimate way to
the
go about
extent there
things.
is like a freeze frame of the mother of the child who will eventually drown the child, like in a pool, like dunking the child. It's fun in a pool, but obviously, I'm sure, Marc, like you watch, you both of you watching it the second time. Now I look back on that being like, oh, that is a hammer. Like, that is not a subtle device at all. Yeah.
Yeah, that particular use of that shot when they're announcing
Only in this documentary is so
his
intense.
death, and there's like red filters, and he starts saying like, "Oh, this is the day that your mother murdered you," and
There's like screams, like he like edits in screams and things, and like, whoa.
right, and I guess it's that blunt instrument approach, which again, that was going to help him achieve his ultimate goal. Even though me sitting home alone years later watching it was starting to make me lose a little faith in his like filmmaking instincts, and that maybe the fact that he didn't necessarily have a big career after this was like he just kind of threw in used every trick he could on this particular film. But like you guys are saying, it's a double-edged sword. With we're lacking that detachment that another filmmaker would bring to this, and that is both allows for, it has its advantages and its disadvantages, I guess, depending what you're looking for in a documentary.
Yeah. Well, you also have to think, how else would you tell this story? Like if you, I feel like the story itself is a story that has to be told. I mean, the layers to this thing are wild. And so, if you think about how else you're telling it, and yeah, I think there were some visual choices that kind of hit it over the head a bit rough. I think that's what he was going for. But I think the way he tells the story makes sense, and the way he peels back the layers makes sense. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the rules of, I don't know, like if there are rules, like the rules of documentaries kind of break down with like in the greater context of like all the things and the people that are involved in this. It starts to break down, and it's like less of a documentary and more feels like there's people in the room telling me something that they were involved in. It just feels, I don't know. and maybe it's redundant, but yeah, like that, it just keeps on going back to that. It's like I'm rarely at a certain point thinking about the filmmaking aspects of it, like the what's going on in the artifice. And in that way I think it achieves, because like on, if you're grading it as a paper, I can see that, but like it transcends that for me. So like suddenly I'm like, this is no longer a reason for me to take out my grade book almost. Like there is something else going on here that is just so like, whoa, they're screaming from the TV.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because the times that I've watched it, I wasn't necessarily, I was so swept up in the emotions and the love that everybody had for Andrew and his son, that I wasn't grading it in those ways either. I wasn't looking at these particular shots and kind of criticizing the way that kind of it was cut together. And maybe it's because that first time that I watched it, I was with their family, and it was it was almost a room that I was like, halfway through this film, I was like, how am I in this room right now? Like I almost felt like I was at somebody else's, funeral. It was so powerful. And so it's when you have, I think about that a lot when you have a first experience with a film in a certain environment with a certain audience that's reacting a certain way. It almost has this bigger effect on you as you kind of go through the future watches of it. And this was always a film that I just kind of got swept up in right from the start, and I never really detached. I would never ever had moments to detach myself from that and kind of critique the shot selection of it, so to speak.
Sure, and regardless of what you think about the presentation, like just this actual story is so extraordinary and infuriating, and the people in it are so extraordinary that it is like it speaks for itself. However, the presentation of it is like, even in the flattest possible presentation, this is just a gut-wrenching story. And
Yes.
and I think part of the intention was to generate outrage and get something done, and I think it totally does that.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt.
And I don't
So
know if it screams for much nuance, and I don't know. I The more and more I think about it, I don't know how much nuance I would really ask for. Is it I mean, maybe that is the thing. You could be a little, by seeing something that is so pointed and so like set in its idea of what was true about the situation and who was wrong in the situation. One could wonder if there's things we don't know, I guess, or like, therefore. But I don't know. It seems, even through all that, like, very emotional response, it seems very easy to see through it as like, I don't know if there is much nuance needed. It does seem like there was a very cruel act followed by a miscarriage of justice, like very clearly, like just it's all laid out very clearly. And then furthermore, therefore, another act of cruelty that should never have happened because of that miscarriage of justice. So it's just like this reaction that is this movie is just seems very warranted to me, without and using ideas like, just right and wrong in very black and white terms. It seems like it kind of gets to do that, and which not a lot of things really get to do that, which is a weird place to be, I guess, as a viewer.
yeah, and just, I guess, to wrap up this discussion then, usually we like to ask at the end of each discussion whether, if you could, you would unwatch a movie, which doesn't necessarily mean that you hate it. It could just be that you wish that you hadn't gone through that experience, or however you want to interpret that question. So I'll just start out by saying this is really tough, because this was a really painful return visit for me, knowing what was coming, partly because I had so dreaded returning to this over the years, and unfortunately, we have a podcast that it was perfect for that as far as covering. So, part of me wants to, just unwatch this and read an article about it and sign the petition for bail reform, and that wouldn't have accomplished what this movie was trying to do. So this is a really rough one for me, and my interpretation of unwatching something, I feel like this is kind of a poster movie for that. But I would like to get your final determination, Seth, and then we can let Erik have the final word.
I mean, on one level, I can agree. Like with anything sort of like tragic like this, it is valuable to me though. Like it's like I could do what you're saying very easily. Like I don't need a whole documentary about this. It's again, like I said, it's very cut and dry. Like this, it seems like a black and white issue of like this was right and this was right, and then something wrong came along and fucked it up. Um, but there is the exercise in empathy here that I do think is like really worthwhile, even if it is like a person walked into the room and the movie feels like a person who walked into the room and they're sobbing and you're hearing like the worst story you've ever heard from them, which is very different than like reading about it in a newspaper. Either one, I sort of arrive at the same conclusion, but one is more, I think the viewing of the movie was valuable in that way of like getting close and feeling it and not letting it be just an event sort of. It is like remembering that these events are tied to people and they are not just like, wow, shocking thing happened. It is like these people were kind of shattered, and I can feel that unresolved feeling at the end of this and everything that is really tragic. I don't know. It is just so unique in that sort of like a movie sort of breaking down and being so heavy-handed in a way that I feel like it's rare for it to be allowed to do so. So, yeah, I'm not unwatching it for sure. I don't know. Yeah, again, very hard to rate. I don't know. If anything, I wasn't sure if you did give it some sort of star rating or something, Erik.
I don't think so. I don't think we did
Yeah,
star ratings.
that yeah, it would be nice not to just like it would be nice to just bypass that really.
Yeah, without a doubt. I definitely wouldn't unwatch it. I think for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, I'm a true crime fan. I wouldn't say like I'm a nerd for true crime, but I love, I always have something in the rotation that I'm watching at home, wherever it is. I just love true crime. Watch all the Datelines, all the 48 hours. Like I go. My grandmother was obsessed with it, and she watched it when I was really young, and so I've always been a fan of true crime. And I mean, this is like the layers to this story are just insane. So from a true crime fan standpoint, it's so worth watching. But also, I'm a guy that works for Fandango, and one of the reasons why I work for Fandango is because I love uh, the theatrical experience, yes, but I love kind of the different ways that you can experience a film theatrically, and the ways that it can change you. And this, I mean, putting myself in that theater at Slam Dance with, Andrew's friends and family, I think there's something ridiculously unique about that experience, and experiencing a film like that with that group of people. And I mean, I mean, people were sobbing, like sobbing. Um, and it was uncomfortable. But, for somebody who likes the wild theatrical experiences where you're on the edge of your seat, or the ones where you're jumping, or the ones where you're laughing, equally the ones where people are just sobbing and like full of pain and heartache are also like experiences I want to have, and which I don't know what that says about me, but like I just love the different ways that a film can impact you and change you and stay with you when you watch it with a certain kind of audience. And so watching this with an audience is something I'll never forget. I will never ever want to unwatch that. As gut wrenching as that experience was, I think it kind of helped build me, and it helped move me along in my own career journey and in my own life. And I think the parts of this movie that really stick with me are his friends and family kind of talking about him and giving these really unique aspects about him. And I don't know, there's something that I walked away with, kind of this appreciation for my own family and my own friends, and kind of the support that we had for each other and the experiences that we've had with each other over the years. So there was something that I took away from that, that was pretty powerful. And so yeah, so for all those reasons, gentlemen, I am not unwatching this movie.
All right, I'm the only one.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Beautifully said. All right, well, yeah, everybody, make your own decision on this one, but just beware going in. Don't mix it in with the zoo day like Seth did. But, or maybe do the zoo after.
I really should have done the zoo after. Yes.
Yeah.
I really should have done that after.
That's what we'll take away from this. But Erik, before we let you go, I did want to subject you to our Unwatchables little questionnaire, just to ask you a few general questions, and give you a chance to go on the record about them. With the first one being, Erik Davis, for posterity, what is your favorite film?
I hate this question because there's so many ways to answer it. But I always, you know what, when I'm put on the spot for this, I always go Back to the Future, which is
Cool.
a film that hit me at an age where it was the coolest thing in the world. Not just the kid riding on the back of a car with a skateboard, but also the fact that a kid could go back in time and see his parents. And is there greater conflict that your job and your mission is to save your own existence in a film? Like, I think that's like the biggest kind of drama that you could have. I think the script is just awesome. The music is brilliant. And so it's a kind of film that I can watch whenever. It's got drama. You're on the edge of your seat. It's got a great kind of coming of age story. It's hilarious. It's eccentric. Huey Lewis in the News has got banger after banger on that soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
So for all of those reasons, it's just always stuck with me, and it's been the one I've always gone to as my favorite.
It really is like a perfectly tooled blockbuster. It's like the ideal of one. And for somebody who said, the things you did about the theatrical experience, I mean, there's like nothing better to bring everybody together and elicit all of those reactions. It's like lab made.
Without a doubt, and I mean when I'm asked that question, I'm always going to pick a film that is from like when I was growing up, because I feel like when you're like 8, 9, 10, 11, and you have an experience with a film that's really powerful, like that, I think just sticks with you all the way through. And like Back to the Future was the kind of film that made me fall in love with movies, with filmmaking, because I was like right at that age. I was like, I think like 8 years old or something like that when that came out. And so it just changed my life without a doubt.
The plot is weirdly deep. I kind of don't think about it all the time, but it is like even he's like finding a way of understanding his own father and parents and all this stuff, and like it's wild.
Without a doubt.
All right. So next question is, can you think of a film where your opinion drastically changed upon rewatching at some point?
This was a hard one because I was racking my brain trying to think like what was it? I mean, like I was going back to films from when I was a kid, because there was a lot of films that like just sailed over my head when I was a kid that like I've revisited as an adult and just found new appreciation of. Blade Runner was one of those films that I did not like it when I was a kid. I had buddies of mine that were telling me like, no, this is the best thing ever, and I was like, really? What are you seeing in this film? It's slow, it's boring. But I've since gone back later in life, and I've truly appreciated it, and I loved Blade Runner 2049. And so that would be one of the films. And it's funny, I was talking to my daughter about this question, and she was like, "Why don't you pick Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire?" I was like, "Well, it came out like a couple of weeks ago." She's like, "Yeah, but the second time you watched it, you really enjoyed it." And she was right. Like the first time I watched that film, and even though it's like a couple of weeks old, so it kind of barely counts, but first time I watched that film, I was in a screening room with like two other people, and I was like, I'm not. This is not a very good film. I wasn't crazy about it. I'm a huge Ghostbusters nerd, and I was very excited this film was back in New York. But then I watched it with her, with an audience that was really into it and laughing and cheering and sort of it kind of, I don't know. It goes back to that like the way you experience a film and who you experience a film with can kind of impact the way you feel about a film. And I liked it a lot more the second time I saw it with an audience.
Made for that, yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if this might merge a little bit with the next question then, which is, what is your most unpopular movie opinion? Because I know that film was not greeted that positively by critics.
No, that film wasn't. And you know what? I'm still going to stay within, well, I'll stay within the last 2 years because this one I was fighting for. But the last Indiana Jones movie, I loved it. And The Dial of Destiny. I love this movie. I felt like nobody else liked it. It premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. It was like rotten immediately, and then I saw it and I liked it. But then I when it came home, I watched it another 3 times, and every time I watched it, I liked it more and more. And like it felt like it. I don't know. There was just something about it, a spirit about it. I thought Mangold's shot selection is gorgeous. I think there are certain frames, if you pause it, just are dynamite. I love the ending; it's so out there, and and I liked Harrison Ford, and I actually liked the de-aging too. It kind of brought me back to the spirit of a great Indiana Jones, like that whole opening sequence on the train. I thought it was really really good. So yeah, I'm not going way back with you, but yeah, I would say give it a shot. It made my top 10 of the year. Indiana Jones, Dial of Destiny.
Okay, I'm convinced. I'll try it.
Give it
All
a
right.
watch.
Yeah, I think we both have avoided it.
I have not
Uh,
seen it, no.
and yeah,
But I
and
would.
now you might have convinced us. What did you think about Crystal Skull?
Did not like Crystal Skull.
Okay.
That one I was really sort of very, very lukewarm on. Did not like it. I thought I liked Shia LaBeouf. I thought he did a good job. But and Kate Blanchett. I mean, anytime she's a villain in a movie, I'll watch the hell out of it. But I thought Dial of Destiny was a better film.
All right. Well, if we're on the same page about not liking Crystal Skull, maybe there's hope
Halfway there.
for Dial of Destiny. Okay.
Yes.
All right. And then next up is, what would you consider your most unwatchable film? Which again could be something that you hate, but also just something that you find just too disturbing to want to return to. However you
Yeah,
want to.
that's where I'd be. Like, I mean, I remember growing up, like Faces of Death, like those movies were just, I could not watch them. Like, I remember going to sleepovers and like some kid had it on a VHS and putting it on, and it'd be like traumatizing me, and like be calling my parents and asking them to pick me up. And so like I go like anything like that, um, body horror, I have a hard time with. Uh, in a lot of ways. Like even The Fly. Okay, as awesome as The Fly is, the Cronenberg movie, I don't know. I just I there's something about like body horror and transformation and things like that just they churn my stomach and they're super hard to watch. So I'd kind of go in that vicinity.
All right. I don't even know if even Seth knows this, but Faces of Death is on our long list that people can choose from if they want
No,
to.
no, no. I've been pretty psyched about no one picking it so far.
I was definitely not picking that one. I'm not.
Yeah, well,
revisiting
bless
that.
you.
All right. So our final question, which you may or may not be able to answer, but this is a long-running debate on this podcast, which is Southland Tales, good or bad?
You know, I can't answer this question with a lot of details because I watched it once. I wasn't crazy about it, and I've never watched it again. So I'd probably say bad because there was nothing in the film that inspired me to want to watch it again. Although I did like the Killers song that they use in that, right? Don't they use like a really
Yeah.
good Killers song in that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
All these things that I
All
know.
these, yeah. So it's a great song that movie kind of ruins, but But yeah, I'd probably say bad, unfortunately.
Are we just gonna
All
collage
right.
all these Southland Tales answers together
Yeah.
into one giant episode one day?
Tony, add it to the tally.
It's
Well,
true.
Our
I don't
mission
know.
is to keep.
I
Our mission is to
like
keep
it.
that
Marc
way.
hates it, so Marc has to ask. He just refuses to believe that it's possible.
We're gonna democratically prove you wrong at some point. All right. Well, Erik, thank you so much for letting us pick your brain. I know we went a little bit longer here than usual, but it was great. Even though we talked about a movie I can't wait to never ever watch again.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks
But
so
you
much
can't.
for having me.
You can't
But I
unwatch
can't.
it. That's the whole thing. You just can't.
Unless I go back to the future.
Whoa!
Sorry.
All right, we know
I
what
was-
the end credit song is.
We just need a pithy line to go out on. Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.